This is a talk by Francis, a member of the What If campaign, a new campaign launched in Wellington, New Zealand at the Digital Power and Social Control public meeting in May 2015.
Tēnā koutou katoa. So I'm going to talk tonight about another example of data control, the IDI. It's been mentioned, and then a bit about our what if, it's our group analysis of what's going on, some examples of resistance, and introduce our campaign. So we're deeply interested in the links between these kinds of projects that we're all discussing tonight, and understanding together what that means for all of us and for society. So we've heard about Real Me, we've heard about an update on state surveillance, we've heard about both our spaces for online activism and the ways that then generates data that isn't in our interests. And so as we see it, all these projects are interconnected. You have the state surveillance, you have the corporate surveillance, the Google, the Facebooks, the Twitters, you have the movement data, whether that's in cars or just those cameras that tell you what's going on a highway or what's on at the beach, GPS on cell phones. We have the kind of information that bosses gather and hold on people, like drug testing, like your work email addresses, as we've heard about. We have the data sharing agreements, so between two particular agencies in the New Zealand state, for example, there's a data sharing agreement that allows customs and StudyLink to share information, or customs and IRD. So if I tried to leave the country and I was behind on a student loan payment, they're allowed to share that and they can stop you leaving the country. So in 2013, Nicholas Jones from the Herald wrote a big article on this. At the time, there were 56 known agreements where data is readily shared between two agencies. I'm sure it's more now. And that doesn't include any access from those agencies to the police, to the GCSB, to the SIS, and then within those three agencies. That isn't even public. We don't know, except we're sure the extent is significant. There's the collection by the left. There's these things like Nation Builder, yeah? So you log on to social media and you comment on a page of a political party and they track that back and they link it to what they already hold on you, which they bought off, which they have access to off the electoral roll, plus any info you've given them. So we see it across all sorts of spheres, these growing databases. And we've heard about Real Me, a project that's underway, and we've heard about what the state hopes that to look like. And I'm going to talk today about the IDI. This is the Integrated Data Infrastructure. So this might be, I think of it a little bit like in other countries, they do have big single data sets. I was living in Germany last year, and you go and you tell what your new address is every time that you move. So there's more, and that would then go across all the government agencies. New Zealand has a different tradition. In our country, for the agencies hold their information separately, which is why you change your address with the IRD and it doesn't change with those other agencies. We had one of the earliest privacy acts. We fought against identity cards in the past, in the 1980s, and won that fight, except for people on benefits. So the IDI is run out of Statistics NZ, and that's important because the Statistics Department has an exception under the Privacy Act. And we also have heard tonight about the Statistics Act, which was changed. It used to say that statistical data could be collected for statistical purposes. This was amended to also say and research purposes. So there's nothing to stop that shifting again for operational purposes. And the IDI is a Treasury project now. So it was built by Stats and now it's a government-wide project. In June 2014, so it's an integrated data set, ostensibly for research and statistical purposes. And it holds linked data on early childhood, primary education, secondary education, tertiary education, benefits, our tax data, tenancy data, results from those compulsory surveys that ask you incredibly detailed information about your spending in your life, workplace injury data, charges and sentencing data, border movements, and student loans and allowances data. And it's a person-centred database. So it's about individuals. Each of us And it's also longitudinal, so it refers to the same individuals across time. So for me, it would hold my uni, what unis I've been to, my current income, border movements, etc. But it will also hold that from as early as the data set goes. So I'm in a cohort of school leavers in 2004, and that data set will provide knowledge of any interactions I've had with the criminal justice system, any earnings, any tertiary study, any border movements. So this is a shift. We used to see social research in terms of cohorts, so school leavers, perhaps my generation of school leavers, what were young people doing in 2006? But this is individualised longitudinal data. Just last month, we've heard that Stats NZ have added to this data set a complete health population, health being one of the data sets that most people still do deeply believe is private. Births, deaths and marriages data, data on the victims of crime and vulnerable children and their families. And at the moment, how they link, they don't use names as far as I know, but how they link that data is through your IRD number and now also through births and visa data. One day I'm sure they would love to just link everyone to their Real Me account and they can make the links that way. So it's available, this huge data set, to statisticians, to researchers and increasingly to other government agencies because it's now a government-wide project. There's lots of other data sets that they would love to add to it, like working for families data, citizenship, all those census answers that you're assured are private, the growing up research in Auckland, which also asks incredibly detailed questions of families and parents, and further beneficiary data. So we would say, why does the government want this? It's unlikely to be so that they can better assure everyone gets their welfare payments. As I've said, it can't be right now used for operational purposes. It's for research projects. And yes, so this is things, but these kinds of projects, I suspect, could easily shift into, I've heard of one that didn't go ahead, but this is the kind of thing. So households where you see tax income and households where you see benefits being claimed, because it's incredibly detailed household data. And of course, the purpose for the potential use for operational purposes is there. Now this massive data set exists in a way that we didn't used to have in New Zealand. It would just take a change of law to be able to use it for those purposes. It's plausible that we could find ourselves with our lives being screwed up by the state down the track and not even know why, because this isn't a data set that you can ring up and say, oh, you've got my ACC details wrong. Can you change them? It's not how it works. One day it will likely be held on the cloud, so it goes through the Patriot Act, goes through the states as well. So there's been almost no debate on this. It's not a project that's widely known. There's been very little debate about the power and control that this information gives to the state and private business. And it's not going to be used to ensure universal access to the basic needs of everyone in the country. It's much more intended to target populations that this data says need help, so that those people can be more disciplined in their lives by the state. And so that, I would argue, people have less options for how to survive. Sometimes people draw welfare data and tax data to income in the same household because that is the only way you can survive on $240 a week. So this shuts down people's options for surviving under capitalism. We've heard it gets called evidence-based government, but as Sandra said, you have to have the debate on the destination. This just means a huge data set that they can argue they can use that data in whatever direction that they want. Like another example we've seen is the evidence that people who graduate with arts and humanities degrees don't that often work in those fields and don't that often earn as much money as graduates from other disciplines. And so this is used to cut arts funding in universities. As we've also heard, while all of these projects are going on, the state is increasingly closing off access to data, and those private corporations hide always. Anyone who's tried to write an Official Information Act request in recent years knows this. So what if sees developments like the IDI as an extension of the existing forms of power and control? If you're trying to survive on a benefit, you're already struggling under capital in the state, and this is just yet more data that can then be used to control our lives. And so people resist in all sorts of ways. We've seen in the last year or two kindergarten teachers who've been asked to use a national student number for little kids 3 or 4 years old, with the threat that that information then goes back to WINS. Yeah, sometimes this is so that if you don't send your kid to kindy, you get your DPB cut by 50%. And we've seen kindy teachers refuse to do that because that's not their role in society. It didn't go ahead, but kindy teachers refuse even to implement that. In some places, they want to be part of the community rather than part of a punitive state. People use false names on social media. People are selective in what surveys we fill out. People go on demonstrations against the GCSB or call for its closure entirely. We've had all those leaks from surveillance. We've had outcries when these data breaches occur. They're bigger than they used to be because more data is held on us, whether that's ACC or whether it's the Earthquake Commission. There's lots of stories in recent years. People give false addresses. There's lots we challenge, as we talked about, challenge the old data that's held on us by ACC and so forth. So this is what we, the What If campaign, are interested in, both drawing the links between all of these shifts that are happening and developing our analysis together and figuring out the ways that we can resist it collectively. So our group is a grassroots education and action campaign working to stop data collection and sharing by the New Zealand state and private corporations for the purposes of social control and exploitation, and instead working for community control of the information. We've heard some arguments in favour of how big data could help us run our societies, but those would need to be decisions made by us in the common interest. And we can't opt out of this digital age, and we shouldn't have to. So we need to get together and work towards creating a society where information is held for the common good, just as I hope we one day live in a society where other resources like food or education are held in the common good. We have a website, whatif.org.nz, and we're going to be putting up information that we've gathered, just the media stories that you see on all these issues, so that it's in one place, and government reports on projects like Real Me and the IDI, whatif.org.nz. We'd love to work on some campaigns with you. We have people in Wellington and Christchurch, and we're looking forward to the workshopping this evening. Thank you very much.